Hello everybody and welcome to the latest video on the channel. I hope we're doing fantastically well and I appreciate all the support we had on the last video where we did a bit of draft for game week 1 where we was drafting and looking at a few options you could have. So I thought in this video today we'd have a deep dive into the teams to see what assets would be good from each team because I feel like you'll get some benefit out of a lot of the teams at some point in the season, especially when it comes to like bench boosting and wildcarding. So it's good to know certain assets from different teams that you could use, especially when it comes to like 4 million, 4.5 million assets, trying to save money or when you need to bench boost and utilize that kind of thing. So we'll jump straight into it and we're going to stay on this screen today with the socials. Don't forget to check out all the socials down the side of the screen for you because it just gives us a bit of ease of access for the FPL to scroll down this side. So logically, we're going to start with Arsenal using alphabetical order. So first, looking at their goalkeepers, they're not the worst set of goalkeepers. I quite like the 5 million, 4 million combination, but Arsenal, I don't see having a great chance of clean sheets consistently throughout the season. They might get a few save points, but I think there's better options elsewhere. So I wouldn't be going for goalkeepers unless potentially you wild card and have got a good run, or you use them for a free hit, for example. But I wouldn't be going straight to them from the start. Saying that about Arsenal's defenders, I don't dislike some of the options they've got there. I quite like holding White and Tierney as decent options. If Bellerin leaves as well, Chambers I don't mind as an option, and they're all fairly cheap. Even Tierney going to 5 isn't too bad, but if I was going for an Arsenal defender, I'd be going probably with Holding or White. Pretty much guaranteed. I'm expecting them to be the centre-back partnership. Tierney, I'm just a bit unsure of injuries, and like I said with Chambers, he's done decent as a fullback. He's not a natural fullback, so I'm not fully convinced by him, but he could get a bit of game time. So there's some cheap options there for the Arsenal defence, to be fair. Ignore this team on the left-hand side. This is my auto-filled squad, so just got that there. Looking at the midfielders, I'm pretty sure Willock is going to end up going to Newcastle. I think that's been agreed in the last few days. So really, you've got Pepe, Saka, Smith Rowe are all decent options, especially if you're looking for a budget option to start with. Smith Rowe is a good one to go for. But if you're looking at Arsenal's fixtures here, the first 3 games, I'd say there's an issue with them. Brentford is arguably okay, but then the next 2. But if you're going from a game week 4, getting in an Arsenal asset is a good way to go. I did like how Pepe was at the end of last season, but if you're looking to save cash, Smith Rowe and Saka are really good options. So I quite like the Smith Rowe change in game week 4. Looks like a good way to go for me. I think midfield's probably the best attacking value you're going to get because if we scroll down here to Aubameyang and Lacazette, I think how expensive they are don't create great value. If you want to take a 1 or 2 week punt on one of them at one stage, maybe, or a free hit, but I don't see great value in there. I'll definitely be sticking with the other midfield options in an attacking sense. So we flick through to our next team, which I'm quite excited about for the season, I'm not going to lie, Aston Villa. So, of course, the main man in goal, Martinez. I think a lot of people will be going with Martinez from the start. And personally, don't think I'm going to go for that because I really want to use the funds elsewhere. So the big draw to him last season was him being 4.5 million. Now it's 5.5. It's a bit too much for me. I'd rather use that million elsewhere. So it's not a bad shout. Villa are very good defensive last season, so I quite like it. I don't disagree with people picking that in their teams. It's a very nice option. The defence I quite like as well. I think Target is the best option in defence because he's got a good delivery with his left foot. He can get up and down the left-hand side, might even pop up with the odd goal, maybe get a few assists as well. He's got a good cross on him. Mings and Conser actually got a few returns, especially from headers from corners last season, so they're not a bad option either. They're all priced at 5 million, so they're kind of giving the same option. But if I was going for one, I'd be going for Target. He'd be a good one to be using on like a bench boost because you know he's going to get the minutes. So I quite like that one later on in the season. Then I think we get to a more exciting part of the team, like moving on to the midfield. I'm especially excited to see the 2 new signings in Buendia and Bailey. I think they're going to bring a lot of interesting options to that Villa side, especially Buendia. I feel like Buendia's got a bit more experience in England, so I expect him to do slightly better than Bailey, but you have to see how they're going to play. It's about adjusting to the new league. Some of them can take it to a house on fire and others can't. So it'll be interesting to see. And well, I think they're probably the best two midfield options, but it depends how much football, especially Bailey, will play at the start, because it still allows Traore and El Ghazi to be decent options, but you've got to watch out now because there's probably two positions up for grabs and there's four very good players there. Even you got Trezeguet here as well, so you're not always guaranteed the minutes. You probably want to. If I was starting out in the start of the season, Buendia would be a standout option. Villa, you have to think particularly, have got a very good first three fixtures. So if you were jumping on one midfielder for now, I'd be going Buendia for first three fixtures, and then you might want to sub out someone else, even one of the Arsenal assets that we mentioned. So that's a good strategy there. I think Bailey would be a bit of a wait and see for me, and then you want to be seeing who's kind of first choice. But I know Villa do like to rotate their wingers quite a bit. But if one of them has an outstanding start to the season, they're probably nailed on to always start on the wing. So it'll be an interesting one to find out. And I think an issue, I think with the Villa forwards, everyone, well, probably a lot of people had Watkins in their starting squad, and the signing of Danny Ings has put a bit of doubt around that because there's a thinking here that Ings is probably going to play striker and then Watkins might go out wide. I think this is one you need to pay close attention to in their last pre-season games because they could easily go like a 4-4-2 or 4-2-2-2. Um, so Watkins and Ings both play up front, but then it could easily be Watkins out wide. So Ings and Watkins both up front. Watkins is probably still an option, but the fact that they've signed Ings, as long as he doesn't get injured, I'd say he's probably the best attacking Villa asset, assuming that he'll also be on penalties based on him normally taking penalties for his previous club at Southampton. But I do like that Ings signing for Villa, and I'd say that makes him a lot better asset than Watkins, but not taking anything away from Watkins because he played very well last season and played a lot of minutes. So he's more reliable in terms of fitness. But Danny Ings at the minute, if he stays fit, you've got to be going for him up front. But there's a lot of options there in Villa that can dive into a lot into the season. Right, so we're going to Brentford. It's always difficult for a Championship team coming up into the Premier League. So a lot of their assets will lose a lot of value. If you're looking at their stats from last season, it's a bit difficult to kind of look at that. So when I'm looking at the goalkeepers, this is actually one I actually looked at because the method I'm going for this season is to have a 4.5 or two cheap goalkeepers, so maybe a 4.5 and the 4 million. So Brentford is one you could do that with. I'm not saying it's the best option. I personally think Brighton, Watford are two better options than Brentford to start off with. There's a few other options outside of that. So you could be using them for a free hit if they've got a good fixture, but I'm not sure I'd be going with them. They could get quite a lot of save points, but I'm not expecting a lot of clean sheets. And I think, as I'm going to say about most of the promoted teams here, I don't expect a lot of points from the defence. But there are two that I kind of like the look of in Brentford's defence. Good simply because he's 4 million and he seems to be getting quite a bit of pre-season time, but that's not doesn't mean he's guaranteed to start, but he's just purely there for the 4 million. I wasn't expecting him to start in my team most weeks. And then Henry, who is Brentford tend to play the five at the back, and Henry would be the wing back. So he had a few injuries last season, so his stats don't look great from last season, but he's more an attacking wing back, so he could get some returns playing there. But like I said, I wouldn't advise going for Brentford later down the line. You might want to use those, so I'd be looking at them. Yeah, I do like Henry. If we go to midfield, there's one standout option I'll be saying, and if you're looking for a budget option, it's not a bad option to be going for. So I'm looking at, I think it's Mbemba. You can just deal with pronunciation there, guys. I apologise for that one. So Brentford haven't got a bad run at the start of the season, and then they've got some good patches of fixtures where if you want a budget option, he's not a bad option to have. He was the second highest goal scorer behind Tony last season. He normally plays like wide midfield or supporting the striker if they play two up front. So I do like him as an option. They've got a few other decent options in here, but I think he gives you goal scoring and assist ability. So I'd be going for him if you wanted a cheap midfielder, especially later on in the game if you're looking to get a Brentford asset in for the good run of fixtures. And then I think a lot of people are going to have Tony in their starting lineup. at the start of the season. Like I said, they've got a good run of fixtures. I think about around 37 goals Tony scored last season. So, although I mentioned there'll be a reduction in returns, going from 37, even coming down to even like 10 or 15 goals would be really good for that kind of asset. 6.5 million. You just could have him as a set and forget most of the season. You might even want to hold him through this more difficult run because he could nick a goal, and he's most likely, if Brentford score, he's going to get the goals. He's on penalties as well. So he's by far the best option for Brentford, and I do like a cheap midfielder in there for Brentford. I'm not going to pronounce his name again. Right, so we go on to Brighton. I mentioned about the goalkeepers, the strategy I'm going for. So I quite like the combination of Brighton goalkeepers if you're going for two goalkeepers. They're struggling in defence at the minute, Brighton, because I would say Burn and Lamptey would probably be their two fullbacks that they would start with usually. So they're both out, which concerns me a bit in their defence. I don't mind originally because I've got a decent run of fixtures. If you look here at Brighton, I was initially going to go for a defender. I was actually on Burn at one point. I was going to go with him, but I'm a bit unsure with both of these injuries how stable they're going to be at the back. So it's drawn me a bit away from them. But Brighton is a very kind of team. If you target a certain run of fixtures and they're on form, they can actually perform quite well for you in FPL. I think a lot of people, for example, bought in Trossard for the free hits, or like wildcard teams later on last season, they went very well for them. So that links quite well to our midfield. I think Trossard is probably by far the best option in midfield. Gross can be decent on times. I think his first season he had in FPL, he played very, very well, but he played more as a winger. Now he's more in central midfield. So Trossard is by far the best asset there. Like I said, they've got a decent run to start with, but I think there's better options at that price bracket to start the season with. But if you're thinking about later on the season, targeting Brighton, he's a very good option. I do like Morpie quite, I've got a slight like for Morpie. He's not very consistent. So again, I think start of the season, not much value in him. He might pop in a goal or two because those fixtures are decent, but he's more thinking about later down the line. He's not one I'm going to set and forget for the whole season. Burnley are always pretty solid defensively. I know people have had doubts with Pope being out, maybe, because he's had some injury doubts that it makes their defence less appealing. I think it's very similar again to Brighton because Burnley don't have the best run if you get them on a good patch, but if you get them on a bad patch, then it's a bit difficult. So if like you're wildcarding around this time, like 12s, then fair play, get them in. But Burnley isn't someone I'd be starting a lot of that with a lot of their assets. The best asset, for my opinion, for Burnley at the minute is just Brownhill because he's 4.5. He's probably going to be on quite a few set pieces. Could not get in with the odd goal or assist, but he's very much a bench player for your FPL team and just a cheap midfielder who actually plays, so gets you guaranteed 2 points most weeks. And then I think similar kind of to the Burnley forwards as well, Chris Wood will get you quite a few goals, as you can see by his points tally there, but 7 million I think is just, for what he offers, if we're in a good run of fixtures, yeah, fair play, but if not, I wouldn't be going for him. So Chelsea are going to be quite interesting. I think a lot of their attacking assets are going to change depending on if they sign Lukaku, which I believe could happen in the next week or so before the Premier League starts. But in general, goalkeepers I'm not really going for on Chelsea. I think that's a stay clear of. So I think a thing about the Chelsea team is the fixtures at the start of the season to game week 6 aren't great. So naturally, I think a plan for all of us should be bringing in Chelsea assets from game week 7. They've got a really nice run there. So if we're bringing them in at 7, game week 7 kind of time, and that, I think that gives you a very good time, like 5 or 6 game weeks to kind of work out how the team is playing, who the best assets are. So that's a very good gauge to see where we are at that point. But if I'm talking this point in time, Chilwell is the outstanding asset for me. Alonso was rumoured to be going to Inter Milan. I don't think he's going to be included in the Lukaku transfer now. So there's a slight risk of rotation, but Chilwell, best asset in my opinion. If Reece James gets some time as well, game time at right wing back, he could be rotated as well. But I think it's a very good gauge the first 5 or 6 games to see who's the favoured in each position, and we could take a decision when we get to that point, if we want to bring one of them in, it's probably a nice change to Chilwell from one of the defenders later on when we get to about game week 7. So, as I mentioned, the Lukaku transfer can change a lot of these assets. So, if we're talking FPL, really, the main assets you will be looking at are Mount, Havertz, and then depending on who's playing at Pulisic and Ziyech, but I wouldn't be going that far down. So, well, unless you see, like we mentioned with the defenders, someone outstanding in the first few games, then they have to play. So there's two views here. So if Lukaku doesn't sign for Chelsea, I think Havertz is the best asset because he's likely to play the false nine, be a bit more attacking, even just play off Werner if they put Werner up front. But Werner likes to play from out wide. So Havertz is the best option as of now without Lukaku signed. But if they get Lukaku, I'd say Mount would become the best asset there. So from that game week 7, again, I'd be recommended to get probably Mount in, assuming Lukaku signs, or obviously Lukaku is a great asset if he comes into the game, but at the minute he's not in the game. So until Lukaku is possibly here, I wouldn't be going for the Chelsea forwards at all. So Werner can get the odd goal and assist, but I think we all know a bit about Werner, and you can't particularly be relied on to guarantee you those returns that we want. Crystal Palace, defensively, I'm not convinced by Palace at all. I'll be staying well clear of them unless you get, like I said, a good run of fixtures. The start of the season isn't great for them at all. Even most of the season, they don't get a good patch of fixtures. They've got a few there, but I'll be staying well clear of most of the Palace team. I like Eze when he's fit, but obviously he's out. I think Zaha is the only viable asset you should be going anywhere near for Palace. But again, I'd only be doing that for a few weeks if you've got a good run of fixtures. Can mention Benteke there as well, but Palace aren't really going to be an FPL team for us this season. I would never ever want more than Zaha and Benteke unless we get to like a double or triple game week further down the line. So let's go on to Everton. Don't trust Pickford in goal. He's a lot better for England than he is for Everton, strangely. The outstanding one, I think a lot of people probably selected in their original teams, will be Digne, because it's obviously got the chance to have a clean sheet. He's very good at crossing the ball in from the left, because sometimes kind of play like a left wing back rather than a left back. He could be on quite a few set pieces as well. From watching their friendlies, he's likely to get some set pieces. I don't think he's going to get them all, because I think Townsend will get a lot of, depending on the angle of his left or right and how they want to swing the ball in. Townsend's probably going to do it from one side, Digne from the other. That's what I've seen a bit from the pre-season. So he's got probably get a few set pieces. He's also decent at free kicks, like actually shooting at goal. So he's by far the best asset in there in Everton. To start with, their run as well is quite decent all the way up to at least 7. So he's a very good starting defender to have, and he's a personal favourite of mine from last season with a little triple captaincy on him. Like I mentioned, I don't mind Townsend in the midfield. He's decent value at 5.5 because he's an established Premier League player, and he's probably the most nailed on out of these wingers, because I see Townsend, Iwobi and Gray as your main wingers that Everton have, unless they bring someone else in. James plays like in the middle rather than out wide most of the time, so Townsend I quite like at that value. He's a nice good price for that. So I think he's by far the standout in the midfield. I have issues with their strikers. Richarlison, don't think of him an asset yet. Later on, maybe, but he's literally been playing in the Olympic final today. So he's not going to be playing probably for a month. I think he's going to miss probably 3 or 4 games for Everton at the start of the season, so not straight away. And there's rumours of an injury for Calvert-Lewin, which has come around over the weekend. He's not playing in a pre-season game today against Man United. So there's doubt about him starting even at the start of the season. So I think really only Townsend and Digne at the start of the season, but obviously Calvert-Lewin will become a great option later down the line if he's fit. Even if he misses 1 or 2 games, he'll still be decent coming in like game week 2 or 3. So we go to Leeds. I think in their defence, the best asset has been taken away and moved into midfield, which is disappointing, but I still like Ayling at 4.5. Great value for that. I do like the new fullback they've got here, Firpo, at 5 million. He could be a decent attacking fullback to keep an eye on. He's not someone I'll be bringing in straight away because he's a new signing, but we need to see how he adjusts. And could be an interesting one to look for. Could be a new Dallas if we're lucky. Midfield, I don't see Dallas as good as option in being moved to midfield. A lot of his, well, not a lot of his points, but some of his points are being boosted by the clean sheets from last season. So realistically, it probably would have been around Rafinha's points or even lower. So Harrison and Rafinha are by far the best options in midfield for me. I prefer watching Rafinha play, but then you can see Harrison had the better returns last season. So I'd be edging to Rafinha just because you're watching him and you want him to get points. It's kind of more thrill of watching them. And then Bamford, really well last season. He's a bit overpriced in my opinion, but if you get him on the right run, maybe from like game week 5 to 10 here, he's got a very good run, so he's definitely still an option to be going for. Right, so go down to Leicester. Goal, Schmeichel's not a bad option in goal. I don't mind that at all. He's got a lot of injuries in defence though, which makes me a bit more hesitant on there. Because realistically, I would say Evans, Fofana, and you could argue about Justin if he'd be starting, but obviously he had a great season last season. I'd say both their centre backs are actually out. Sion-Chu, you could argue his first choice, but they're looking a bit weak in that defensive area, so maybe Schmeichel isn't the best to be going for. I do like their fullbacks, to be fair. Castagne, Pereira, and Bertram, depending on who plays. So you've got the issue with the rotation there, but you've got a good potential of getting returns if you pick the right one. Just keep an eye on their pre-season games, who you expect them to start. So midfield, I think the two standout ones for me, although Tielemans is high up on their points, are Harvey Barnes and Maddison. Barnes has looked bright coming back from injury in pre-season, so I'd be edging towards him instead of Maddison because Barnes seems to get a lot more up the pitch. He's more likely to score the goals. Maddison's more likely to provide the assist, or he could bang in a few from the edge of the box. So I do like Barnes. He's got an indifferent start to the season, but I can see people having him 1 to 3. It's kind of, you don't get a great run at once start with the season, and there's a bit, I'm not sure if he might come off after like 60 minutes because of his fitness issues, so it's one of the ones I'm thinking about, but I'm not dead set on having Barnes in. There's a lot of options in that midfield. I think it's similar to Iheanacho as well. If he's guaranteed to start, he's a great option, but I've got doubt about him starting, so I'm struggling with the Leicester assets at the minute until we kind of get an idea who will start. But I'd say the midfield is the place to go with a Barnes or a Maddison if you're starting off with a Leicester asset. Vardy, I think, is too expensive, especially when he's got those rotation options now, especially with Daka coming in as well. So if we go down to one of the big hitters we'd expect in FPL points, I think I'd be staying clear of Alisson. 6 million is too steep for me. Obviously, he's guaranteed, well, not guaranteed, but he's quite likely to get a few clean sheets, but that's to wait and see. Standout options, obviously, Robertson and Trent to start with. A lot of people will start with Trent. I think he just gives you that a little more attacking option. Obviously, Robinson is not a bad option at all, but I feel Trent just gives you that extra. You could have a few free kicks. You can more likely to score like a long-range goal or one from the edge of the box, as we saw near the end of last season. So I think a lot of people set and forget Trent will be in there from the start of the season. But even a double-up is quite viable, but you might want to spend that 7 million elsewhere because there's a lot of good value in like the 5.5 million defenders to be going for instead. So I don't think I need to touch on Salah much to start with because he's probably, along with Bruno, he's an outstanding FPL asset, so he's got to be in your team in my opinion. Mane, I think he's just not consistent enough to justify the 12 million. If you want to wildcard him in because he's got a good run of fixtures or free hit with him in there, I've got no objections with that, and he might obviously start the season quite well, but his last season performance wasn't up to Salah's, so Salah is standout for me. Jota, I quite like. There's obviously the risk of Firmino rotation throughout the season, but he could get a decent run at the start of the season because Firmino has been at the Copa America. Jota got knocked out a bit earlier on in the competition in the Euros, so he could start with a few games, and Liverpool's run at the start of the season is pretty decent. Minus the Chelsea game, the first 5 or 6 games are quite well suited to them. But then talking of Firmino, I wouldn't be going for Firmino at all as a striking option. I think he's not an FPL asset that you want to be having in your team. So Man City, I struggle with Man City. I think everyone struggles with Man City, Pep Roulette. Ederson's probably the safest bet to go for alongside Diaz. Um, so looking at the defenders, realistically for me, you could take a risk on Stones or Walker, but Diaz and Cancelo are the standout ones if you want a defender. I'd be going, well, it's a bit of risk you've got here. If you've got a good sub on your bench, a sub or two, Cancelo is out like a better option than Diaz because he can get those attacking returns as well. Obviously, Diaz can score a header, but Cancelo is more likely to be involved in the general play rather than set piece. Diaz is more guaranteed the minutes, so it's just a toss up between them. And obviously, they've got a great chance of getting a clean sheet if either of them play as well. As you can see, the points were quite close last season as well, so it's between those two if you want one. But again, the issue is there are 6 million, so there's probably better value you can get in other defenders. And I think their run, so they've got Spurs first. They've got a decent patch, and I'd argue that patch isn't even great, so a defender to start with isn't nailed on that you need to do it. They've got some better runs later on in the season, but it's not essential to have a City defender, I don't think, at the start of the game. So I think you get to the midfield, and the midfield is a minefield. I have no clue who's going to start. If I was picking the team, I'd be changing it every week as well. So the general consensus for me is avoid at the start of the season to see who becomes established. I don't mind Gundogan because he's the cheapest and obviously from last season, but there's a lot of more attacking assets and a lot more attacking players than him. So I just don't know where to go with the City assets to start with. I'm avoiding the midfield entirely. You feel like Grealish, how much they've signed him for, has to play, but you know what Pep's like, so it might not be true. So it's a void for me as well. Jesus is definitely an avoid for me. But we'll discuss City later on in the season when we get a bit more information on who's going to play and if we need them for like a wildcard situation. So United, I would be avoiding goalkeepers because they can easily rotate. It's a bit difficult to choose. I like, obviously, especially like Shaw because he offers a lot more potential going forward. He can be on set pieces, he can be on corners. I don't mind Wan-Bissaka as an asset at all, but I just think Shaw has different outlets there. You could get the assist potential. You can even get forward with a goal. He's more likely to score than Wan-Bissaka, in my opinion. So Shaw is a standout option for me there. Maguire, you can take the risk on from set pieces, but I feel like Shaw is more likely to get that return, especially over the course of a season. He's more consistent returns. So I really like Shaw as an option going in to the first game. I mentioned, along with Salah, Bruno is by far the best option in midfield to be starting off with. I think Salah and Bruno you really need to just have as a base of your team to start off with in midfield. Looking at the rest of the midfield, obviously Rashford is out injured, so he's not going to be an option for a few months. I really like Greenwood as an option, especially at that price, 7.5. Comparing him to Rashford, I'd argue Greenwood's a better finisher, and he's likely to get a good run in the team at the start of the season because obviously Rashford's out. Martial's just coming back from injury. He's got a few minutes in pre-season, but he's not likely to probably start, or if he does start, he's not going to play the whole game. So you've got that issue. You've got Sancho, who hasn't played for United yet, not even in pre-season, so he's not really an option. So your real competition for Greenwood is obviously him. So you're likely to have a front three. So you've got him, maybe. The issue is also Cavani hasn't actually played any minutes in pre-season. So in pre-season, the only forward players really who have got minutes are Greenwood and James. So you could see Greenwood, James, Pogba and Bruno as your front four. You could put Cavani or Martial in there for some minutes, but I feel like Greenwood, especially in that striking position, is the one who's most likely to get minutes in the first 4 or 5 games of the season. So, and he's also got the fitness to be able to play all those games, play 90 minutes rather than Cavani getting on or Martial coming back from injury. So I really like Greenwood as an option at the start. Not necessarily the whole way through the season, but for the first like 4 or 5 games, definitely. So I've touched on most of these. I really like Cavani as an asset, but I'm unconvinced about his minutes now that I've not seen him play any games in pre-season. He could easily come in and do very well. As I mentioned, Rashford, Martial struggling with fitness. So I quite like Cavani, but I'm not taking the punt on him at the start because I've not seen him have any minutes in pre-season, which is concerning for me at the start of the season. So Newcastle, the actual goalkeeper combination, if you're looking for a cheap combination, isn't too bad, but I don't fancy them to keep a lot of clean sheets. That's why I'm staying clear of all their defence, really. Not considering them unless you want a 4 million defender just to sit on your bench. I think the only real options I see for Newcastle are up front now that Sam Maximan's been moved to an up front position. So Wilson and Sam Maximan by far the best options for me. I'm quite tempted to start with Wilson at the start of the season. The run's not too bad, and he also can score goals really against anyone. Sam Maximan's not the worst option if you're looking for a cheap forward, but he's very streaky. If you can catch him on a run of fixtures, and you can catch him off a run of fixtures, so he's not somewhere I'll be going to start with. But Wilson, by far, is clear as the best option for Newcastle in that, in FPL in general. So Norwich, I just feel like Norwich are just the team that goes up and down every season, and I don't see a lot of value. I think there's two assets, maybe, there's actually three or four. I say that. There's not some FPL assets are decent, but I don't expect them to do particularly well. So in defence, purely because he's 4 million, the centre back here, I'm not going to try to pronounce that at all. He's got a lot of minutes in pre-season, so he's a decent one to just have on your bench as 4 million. He can get you some minutes. It's very similar to Gilmore here, 4.5. He would be my option in midfield as well to have as your cheap player. And then we have to mention Pukki. I like further on in the season, his last four fixtures, his first four fixtures are terrible, but then when you get to game week 5, he's got a decent run. He's got a decent, you could argue 5 to 14, he's got a very good run minus the Chelsea fixture. So he's a very good option to be looking at later on in the season, not particularly straight away, but we've seen him score a few goals in the Premier League before, so we know although he's played in the Championship last season, he can perform in the Premier League. So I like that option going forward in the season. So Southampton I'm concerned about in general for their team this season because they've sold Ings. I'd argue they sold Bertrand, who was a decent player at the back for them as well. So I'm a bit concerned for them. So again, the goalkeepers offer a decent option. If you're looking for a cheap option, you'll get save points, the odd clean sheet. But the defence for me, Walker-Peters you could go for, Vestergaard you could go for, but I'm staying clear of them. Ward-Prowse has got a niggle. Like if you wildcard him later on the season, he's a good option to have in there because he's on set pieces, but staying clear for now. Che Adams becomes a slightly better asset because Danny Ings isn't there, but I'm a bit concerned what actual service he's going to get. And if you get to game week 8 and you're looking to wildcard, Southampton have got a good run and Adams becomes a decent option. But to start the season out, Southampton, I'm a bit concerned unless they make some signings how well they're actually going to do as well. So watch and see for me on Southampton. Probably very similar for Spurs as well. Lloris isn't the worst option, but I wouldn't be going there personally. The defence last season, I always said Reguilon was the best option, but Reguilon has not convinced me at all, so I'm still on the fence with Spurs defence, totally there. So obviously there's debate on the Spurs side if Kane's going to stay or not. Either way, what happens, Son is a great asset throughout the season, and he could just be a stay and forget in your team the whole season. I feel if Kane leaves, Son's an even better asset because I can quite likely see a situation where he plays as a central striker with like Bergwijn, Lucas Moura either side of him. Because if you look in the game as well, technically they only have one striker that's registered to Spurs, which is Kane. So Son could easily play that false 9 kind of position. So Son, I really like as an asset. Kane, obviously, he's having a bit of a hoo-ha with Spurs at the minute, so that there might be the possibility he won't play the first game or two, especially until the transfer window closes to see where he ends up. I'm unsure if he'll go to City or not, so again, Kane is a wait and see, especially for that price. They've got, I think, when it turns to game week 3, they've got a decent fixture, but it's also near the end of the transfer window. So there could be debate if he'll even play that fixture if there's still the concerns with the transfer going on. So Son, by far, for now, is the best Spurs asset. Watch out for Kane there. So Watford, I don't mind the goalkeeping options. As I mentioned, if you're going for a cheap one, I quite like Watford along with Brighton and Brentford. There's a few other ones in there as well, but they're probably the 3 standout ones for me. Looking at the defence, there's not a lot of value there for me. One I do slightly like is it Firmino? Because I feel like he's played in previous seasons in the Premier League. He's obviously he knows Premier League slightly. I'm not going to say he's a great asset for the Premier League, but he also plays at fullback. So if anyone's going to get any returns, it's probably going to be him. But I'm not jumping straight onto him. It's not one I'm going to bring straight into my first team. And then outside of that in the Watford team, there's only really one asset for me, which is Sarr. Because again, he's had experience in the Premier League before. Whenever I've seen him play, he's looked like a dangerous player. He's also on penalties. I'd argue he's one of the best Watford attacking assets just in general outside of FPL. And if I was going for a Watford attacker, it would be Sarr 100%. Because if you look at their attackers, they've got so many. Opposite of Spurs, they've got about 10, 12. It's ridiculous. So Sarr and maybe a defensive one for the cheap options there. So West Ham, again, they had a very good season last season. But I'm not overly convinced by, especially in midfield, I'm a bit struggling with our assets. In goal, I'm not going for them because I've no clue if they're going to rotate between Fabianski, Areola, what's going to happen there. I think it was a bit of an unnecessary signing there for West Ham, personally, especially when it's on loan. But so in defence, the fullbacks by far are the best options in defence. So Cresswell, he's 0.5 more because he takes set pieces, could be on corners. So if you want, you can. It's a very good comparison here because they were both played most of the season. Cresswell has that potential to get a few more points because of those set pieces, but on any given fixture, Kufal can easily outscore him. So West Ham have a decent run at the start of the season, so I quite like a Kufal or Cresswell to start with. It wouldn't be doubling up kind of scenario. It's not that good a run, but I do like them both as options to start the season and throughout the season. Cresswell, I think, at the start of last season had a very good start and then tailed off towards the end, so you just got to watch out for that as well. Midfield, I'm a bit struggling because they can easily rotate the wingers. In my opinion, Bowen is their best option as a midfielder, but I'd be staying clear until we get a better gauge of game time going through the season and the form they're in. The best attacking asset for me at West Ham is Antonio by a distance for now. The only thing with Antonio, obviously, if he gets injured in the last pre-season's game, gets injured in the first few games, we just know with Antonio there's always that risk there. But I feel with that run of fixtures, he's a decent option to be having in at the start of the team, his starting squad. So it would be one of the forwards I'd be recommending for you to start with in your team. So I think we have one more, which don't have a lot of value in there, Wolves. Again, I'd be avoiding goalkeepers. The only defender I'm really tempted by is Nate Norrie, but again, I'm still not that tempted because I think there's a lot of rotation there with Marcel because they've both been playing left back. Nate Norrie could get a few games further forward purely because Podence and Neto are currently out, but then when they're back, you're not going to get that benefit. So a few games at the start of the season maybe, but it's a stay clear for me. I think a lot of the Wolves team is stay clear. If Neto, Podence come back and they look good, get them in. But for now, it's a stay clear for me from Wolves. And Jimenez, again, if he comes back well from injury, obviously he's been playing a bit in pre-season. We have to see what he's like competitively and if he can get up to that, how he was before. He's a good option later down the line if you're just looking for a goal-scoring option, but we need to wait and see again. So there's quite a few teams we just need to wait and see on there. So we have made it through every single team there. I know that might have been a bit quick, guys, but I hope that gives you a bit of a guide how you could be going with the teams throughout the season and how you could interchange between the fixtures a bit. Obviously, we'll be doing weekly videos throughout the season, so hopefully we can be discussing this in more detail. But I hope that gives you a good guide to start with, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any comments or any questions, please just leave them down in the comment section or on Twitter, which is on the social stream at the minute, and Twitch as well. We often do live streams about FPL and different things, even FIFA. So make sure you check them out as well. And I appreciate everyone for watching, and we will see you all on the next one. Have a good rest of your day.